A trucker leans out his window and yells, "Hey, sweetheart, you lost?" But years later, he sees her signing the paychecks for his entire company. The big rig slowed, not for service, but for sport. The driver, a man with a beer gut and a cruel smile, shouted, "This ain't no place for a little lady, go back to the kitchen." Maya kept her focus on the lug nut, her muscles straining. When she finally looked up, her face calm, the trucker just laughed and sped off, leaving her in a cloud of diesel fumes. She knew then that fixing tires was only part of the battle. If you believe in hard work and sweet revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss how this story ends. And comment below with your city and the word justice if you think everyone deserves a fair shot. The place was a forgotten stretch of highway in Nevada, a long, shimmering line of asphalt cutting through the desert. This was her father's business, or what was left of it. A small, sun-bleached shack with a single service bay and a hand-painted sign that read, "Johnson's Roadside Repair." He had died 2 years ago, leaving her with little more than debt and this patch of dusty land. Maya, 26 years old, with grease under her nails and a fire in her gut, was determined to make it work. It was all she had left of him. Every day was the same. The scorching sun, the roar of engines, and the dismissive looks. Most truckers would rather limp to the next big town than trust a black woman to handle their rig. They saw her as a joke, a roadside curiosity. They didn't see the skill her father had taught her, the way she could diagnose an engine problem by its sound, or change a 18-wheeler's tire faster than most men. The central problem wasn't just fixing tires, it was fighting a wall of prejudice. Her savings were dwindling, and the nights were getting colder. Every truck that passed her by was a nail in the coffin of her father's legacy. What was at stake wasn't just a business, but her dignity and her last connection to the man who had believed in her. The pressure was immense. If she failed, she would lose the only home she'd ever known and prove every one of her doubters right. She refused to let that happen. There had to be a way to turn this around. The story of her fight wouldn't be simple. It would involve discovering a hidden secret in her father's old office, a secret that would change everything. The search for respect would lead her to confront the powerful figures behind the very trucking companies that scorned her. She would have to navigate a world of corporate backstabbing and forge alliances in the most unexpected places. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building an empire from the dirt up. But can a single woman on the side of a forgotten highway really take on a multi-million-dollar industry? Some secrets are powerful enough to build fortunes, while others are dangerous enough to get you buried. The world on Highway 93 was its own ecosystem. It lived and breathed by the rhythm of freight. At the center of it was the Greasy Spoon, a diner 5 miles down the road from Maya's shack, run by a man named Sal. Sal was a weathered man in his 60s, with kind eyes who had known Maya's father for decades. He was one of the few people who didn't look at her with pity or disdain. He just saw James Johnson's daughter, working hard. "Another slow day?" Sal asked, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter to her. It was late, and the diner was empty except for them. "You know how it is, Sal," Maya said, stirring the black coffee. "A guy in a Titan freight truck told me to get a real job today. Said his company has a policy against uncertified roadside assistance. I'm more certified than half the guys at the truck stops." "Titan Freight," Sal scoffed. "Bunch of arrogant suits. Their drivers are all the same. Don't pay them any mind, kid. Your dad faced the same thing. He always said, let him laugh, the man who works is always superior to the man who mocks." The background of the characters was stark. Maya was a city girl who had dropped out of community college to care for her sick father. After he passed, she found his journals. They weren't just diaries, they were filled with detailed observations about the trucking industry, timetables, cargo types, fuel consumption rates, and the inefficiencies he saw every single day. Her father had been more than a mechanic. He had been a student of the road. The truckers, on the other hand, were mostly men like Jed, the one who yelled at her most often. Jed was a company man for Titan Freight, proud and loud. To him, the road had rules. It was a man's world, and Maya was breaking those rules just by existing in his space. He saw her as an insult to his profession. The cultural elements of the American heartland were thick in the air. It was a place of fierce independence, but also rigid tradition. A lone woman running a garage was an anomaly. A black woman doing it was, to many, unthinkable. These details weren't just background noise. They directly influenced Maya's struggle. When a truck broke down, the driver's decision to call for corporate support from Titan or risk it with the girl on the road was a decision shaped by decades of culture and prejudice. The secondary characters began to take shape. Sal wasn't just a friend, he was her link to the past and her father's reputation. He'd tell her stories about which drivers were decent and which companies treated their people like dirt. Jed, the antagonist, wasn't just a random bully. He was the face of Titan Freight's corporate arrogance. His motivation was simple: preserving the status quo. He felt threatened by her competence. In his mind, if a woman like her could do his job, it somehow made him and his world less important. He had his own arc, one of ignorance and pride, that was set on a collision course with Maya's ambition. Maya, meanwhile, spent her nights under a single bare bulb in the shack, poring over her father's journals, the numbers and notes starting to paint a picture she had never seen before. The conflict was no longer passive, it became personal and sharp. Jed made it his mission to drive her out of business. He got on his CB radio, the lifeline of the highway, and started spreading poison. "Heard that girl at the old Johnson place is using used parts and charging new prices," he'd say, his voice crackling through the speakers of a dozen trucks. "Wouldn't trust her with a bicycle tire." It was a lie, but lies travel fast on lonely roads. The impact was immediate. The few calls she was getting dried up completely. Trucks would slow down, the drivers would stare at her shack, and then they'd speed up and drive away. The tension was suffocating. She was now burning through her meager savings just to keep the lights on. Every silent day was a victory for Jed and a step closer to failure for her. The scenes were no longer just about her waiting. They were about her watching potential customers reject her one by one. The new dynamic hit its breaking point one stormy afternoon. A hailstorm had just passed, leaving the asphalt slick and dangerous. An independent driver, a young man named Rick, had blown 2 tires on his trailer. He wasn't with a major company like Titan. He was on his own, and every minute he was stopped, he was losing money. He called Maya. She quoted him a fair price, far less than what a corporate service would charge. She was about to head out when his voice came back over the phone, hesitant. "Hey, I just heard on the radio. Some guys are saying you're not reliable." "Who told you that?" Maya asked, her voice tight. "A driver from Titan Freight. Said I should wait for the official tow." "The official tow will take 3 hours and cost you double," Maya stated plainly. "I can have you back on the road in 45 minutes. There was a long pause. She could hear the conflict in his silence, the desire to save money versus the fear planted by Jed's lies. Finally, he said, I think I'll wait. Sorry." He hung up. Maya stood there, the phone in her hand, feeling a cold wave of defeat. That was the first time she truly considered giving up. She sat on an old crate in the garage, the smell of oil and dust filling her lungs, and felt the weight of it all. But later that night, Sal stopped by. He didn't say much. He just handed her a thermos of hot soup and a copy of the local paper. In it was a small article about a massive pile-up on Highway 93. A truck had lost control on the wet road, causing a chain reaction. The driver's name was Rick. He had waited too long, and another truck had slammed into his stalled rig. He was in the hospital. The cause of the initial loss of control? 2 blown tires. The news hit Maya like a physical blow. It wasn't her fault, but she felt the consequence. Jed's words hadn't just cost her a job, they had contributed to a disaster. The conflict was no longer about business, it was about safety, about lives. That night she didn't sleep. She went back to her father's journals, but this time she wasn't just reading his observations. She was looking for a weapon, and she found it. Tucked into the back of the last journal was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It wasn't a memory or a note. It was a business plan. A detailed multi-stage plan to build not just a repair shop, but a full-service logistics company. It was ambitious, brilliant, and to Maya, it felt like a map leading out of hell. The conflict had intensified, but now so had her resolve. Her father's business plan was a lifeline in a sea of despair. It wasn't a vague dream. It was a sequence of cold, calculated steps. Step 1. Secure seed capital and expertise by forming a partnership with James Johnson's most trusted friend and a legendary mechanic in his own right, Gus Riley. A name Maya had only heard in old stories. A subplot was born not of romance or intrigue, but of a desperate search for an old ghost who might hold the key to her future. The pressure was no longer just emotional, it was financial, and it was closing in. The last of her father's life insurance money was almost gone. She counted the cash in a metal box under her bed, enough for another month of electricity and canned food, maybe 6 weeks if she was careful. Time was a luxury she didn't have. The search for Gus Riley wasn't just a hope, it was a necessity. The only clue she had was a faded photograph from the 1980s, showing her young father and another man in matching army jackets, grinning in front of a garage. A sign above them read, "Riley's Auto." She had to close the shop for the day, a risk that meant turning away any potential customer, however unlikely. She drove the 60 miles to Reno, the closest big city, and started her search at the county records office. Nothing. She tried old phone books at the library. Nothing. The trail was cold. Defeated, she stopped at Sal's diner on her way back, the photograph sitting on the passenger seat. Sal noticed her expression as he refilled her coffee. "You look like you've been chasing a ghost," he said. Maya slid the photo across the counter. "I have been. You ever know this guy?" "Gus Riley." Sal picked up the photo, his eyes squinting. A slow smile spread across his face. "Gus? Hell yes, I knew Gus. Tough as a $2 steak, but the best damn mechanic in the state. He and your dad were thick as thieves after they got back from the service. Gus sold his shop years ago after his wife Martha passed. Wanted a change of scenery. Last I heard, he moved to a quiet retirement community out past Carson City, the Silver Creek Estates or something like that. It was a shot of adrenaline, a concrete lead. The subplot was now a clear mission with a destination. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, Maya locked the door to her shack, put a closed for emergency sign in the window, and pointed her old pickup truck toward Carson City. The fuel gauge was hovering near empty, and she was spending money she didn't have, all on a bet that a man she'd never met would be willing to help her fight a war he didn't start. Every mile she drove, the stakes got higher. This wasn't just a trip, it was an all-or-nothing gamble. Silver Creek Estates wasn't so much an estate as a collection of modest, identical-looking houses baking in the Nevada sun. Maya found Gus Riley's address in the local phone directory. She knocked on the door of a small, perfectly maintained home with a garden of cacti out front. The man who answered was lean and wiry, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he grunted. "Are you Gus Riley?" Maya asked, her heart pounding. "Depends who's asking. My name is Maya Johnson. James Johnson was my father." Gus's expression softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. "I heard he passed. Sorry for your loss, kid. What do you want?" He made no move to invite her in. This was the point of no return. Maya took a deep breath. "I'm running my father's old shop, and I need your help. I have his business plan." Gus let out a short, bitter laugh. "Jimmy's plan? Let me guess. It involves taking over the world with a wrench and a smile. Your dad was a good man, but he was always dreaming." He started to close the door. "Wait," Maya said, her voice firm. She held up her hands, showing him the calluses, the grease ingrained in the lines of her palms. "I'm not just a dreamer. I'm a mechanic, and I know the plan looks crazy, but I also know why it can work. Companies like Titan Freight are slow, arrogant, and they treat their drivers like disposable parts. There's a gap in the market, a big one." She spoke with a desperate clarity, laying out everything she'd observed, everything her father had written down, and the incident with the driver Rick. Gus listened, his head cocked. He was still skeptical, but she had his attention. "Words are cheap, kid. Your dad had plenty of them." He paused. "All right, you want to talk business? Come with me." This was the turning point, the unexpected test. He led her back to a pristine garage where a classic 1970s Ford F-150 was parked. It was beautiful, but covered in a thin layer of dust. "My old girl," Gus said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Engine's got a knock I can't find. Been chasing it for 6 months. Every mechanic I've hired has given up. You say you're a mechanic, prove it. You find the problem, we'll talk about your father's plan." Maya felt a surge of fear, then resolve. This was it. She spent the next 4 hours in that garage. She checked the timing, the pistons, the fuel line. Gus watched her silently from a stool in the corner, judging her every move. The problem was elusive, a ghost in the machine. Then, drawing on a lesson her father had taught her about listening, truly listening to an engine, she found it. It wasn't a major failure. It was a tiny hairline crack in the exhaust manifold, almost invisible to the naked eye. It only made a noise when the engine was hot and the metal expanded. It was the kind of problem you find with patients, not just a diagnostic computer. She pointed it out to Gus. He ran his finger over the tiny fracture, then looked at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. He had missed it. Everyone had missed it. He looked from the engine to Maya, then to the business plan she had placed on the workbench. For the first time, he saw her not as James's dreamy daughter, but as a professional. He walked over to a locked filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder and an old bank book. Your father and I, we were going to do this together after we saved up enough. Then life got in the way, he said quietly. He opened the bank book. The balance was significant, his life savings. I'm not going to let a bunch of corporate suits run another good Johnson out of business. I'm in, kid. Not as a lender, as a partner. Let's build this thing. The consequences of Gus's decision were immediate and dramatic. He wasn't a man who did things by halves. The next day, he sold his house in Carson City and moved into a trailer on Maya's property. The first consequence of their new partnership wasn't a meeting, it was an action. A bulldozer arrived and flattened the old, dilapidated shack. Maya felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by the thrill of progress. With Gus's capital and his sterling credit history, they secured a small business loan. They didn't just rebuild, they expanded, buying the empty acre of land next to her father's original plot. Within 2 months, a new structure rose from the dust. It was a modern, 2-bay service center made of steel and concrete, with large roll-up doors and bright fluorescent lighting. A new sign, bold and professional, was erected. J&R Logistics, 24/7 roadside service. Johnson & Riley. This physical transformation sent a ripple of confusion down Highway 93. Jed and the other Titan freight drivers reacted with mockery. Look at that, Jed's voice crackled over the CB. Little Miss Roadside got a rich uncle? Bet it's all for show? Probably can't even pay the electricity bill? They doubled down on their unofficial boycott, steering clear and sneering as they passed. But the independent truckers, the ones who answered to no one but themselves and their schedules, saw something different. They saw a clean, professional operation. An older driver named Earl was the first to take a chance, pulling in with an air brake issue. Gus handled the repair himself while Maya managed the front office, processing the work order and payment with a new digital system. Earl was back on the road in under an hour. That night, the talk on the CB radio changed. You guys see that new J&R place? Earl's voice said. No joke. Fast work, fair price. That old man Gus knows his stuff. The dam had broken. Slowly at first, then all at once, the independent drivers started coming. They were tired of being overcharged at corporate truck stops and waiting hours for service. J&R was different. Maya and Gus hired 2 young, eager mechanics from the local town, and Gus trained them with a firm but fair hand. Maya, focusing on the business side, implemented a loyalty program for repeat customers. The reaction from Titan Freight's corporate office was non-existent at first. J&R was too small to notice. But then a mid-level logistics manager named Peterson, a man who lived by spreadsheets in an office in Phoenix, noticed a pattern. Route 93 was showing a 4% increase in average transit times over the last quarter. It was a small but costly anomaly. He cross-referenced it with service logs. He saw that Titan trucks with mechanical issues in that sector were logging excessive downtime. They were bypassing a new unsanctioned facility to get to the approved but slower vendor 80 miles down the road. The name J&R Logistics appeared in a driver's complaint for the first time. To Peterson, it was just a name on a screen, an irritant to be dealt with later. He had no idea it was the beginning of the end of his company's dominance on that highway. With the service center thriving, the nature of the challenges shifted. The fight was no longer for survival, but for sustainable growth. Maya's personal evolution was rapid and demanding. The grease under her fingernails was often replaced by ink stains from poring over invoices and supply contracts. Gus pushed her relentlessly, not on mechanics, but on business. Knowing how to fix a truck is one thing, he'd say, tapping a stack of financial reports. Knowing how to run a company that fixes 100 trucks is a different game entirely. Her growth was visible in her actions. She spent a week redesigning the workshop's layout for maximum efficiency, cutting the average service time by another 15%. She renegotiated a bulk purchasing deal with a parts supplier in Las Vegas. saving them thousands per month. The woman who once flinched at the sound of a trucker's insult was now confidently on the phone, arguing down the price of diesel filters with a distributor who was twice her age and had 3 times her experience. She was no longer just James Johnson's daughter. She was the co-founder and operational manager of J&R Logistics. The new challenge came from the competition. The big corporate-owned truck stop 50 miles east, Highway King Services, started to notice the dip in their service bay revenue. They responded by cutting their prices on simple jobs like tire changes, trying to starve out the new upstart. For a week, J&R's business slowed. It was a classic corporate squeeze play. This is where Maya's transformation truly shone. Her old self would have panicked. The new Maya saw it as a data problem. She and Gus stayed up all night, analyzing their numbers. They couldn't compete on price alone without sacrificing quality. So, they decided to compete on value. The next day, Maya launched a new initiative. Every truck that came in for service received a free comprehensive 20-point digital inspection report, emailed directly to the driver and their dispatcher if they had one. It detailed tire wear, brake life, fluid levels, and potential future issues. This was a game changer. Highway King was just fixing the immediate problem. J&R was providing preventative care. Independent drivers loved it because it helped them budget for future repairs. Small fleet owners loved it because it gave them a clear overview of their assets' health. The business came roaring back, stronger than before. Maya had not just overcome the obstacle, she had used it to make her company better. It was during this period that she revisited her father's master plan. The service center was stage 1 and it was a success, but her eyes were now fixed on stage 2, freight hauling. She started spending her evenings not just on J&R's finances, but on the logistics of the freight itself. She studied shipping manifests she got from friendly drivers, analyzed cargo rates, and mapped the most profitable local and regional routes. The trucks she was fixing were carrying millions of dollars in goods every day. The real power, she realized, wasn't in the wrench. It was in owning the truck, the cargo, and the contract. The dream was scaling up, becoming bolder. The girl who fought for scraps on the roadside was now figuring out how to take her seat at the table. The momentum from their success was a powerful force, but Maya knew it was fragile. Her focus shifted from simply running the business to strategically protecting it. This led her to Sal's Greasy Spoon. His diner, once a hub, was now quieter. The truckers who serviced at J&R often grabbed a quick snack from the vending machines Maya had installed, saving time. She saw the unintended consequence of her success and refused to let a friend falter. One evening, she sat down in one of his worn-out booths with a proposal. "Sal," she began, "how would you like to have 200 guaranteed customers a day?" He raised an eyebrow. "I'd like it just fine. You know where I can find them?" "You're looking at her," Maya said. "I want to move you. All of it. I'll build you a brand new, top-of-the-line diner right inside the J&R facility. You'll be the exclusive food vendor for my staff and every driver that comes through." Sal was speechless. It was an act of loyalty that solidified her reputation, not just as a sharp business owner, but as a pillar of the community she was building. The subplot of her first and most steadfast ally was resolved. He was now an integral part of her growing empire. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office in Phoenix, the tension around Peterson, the Titan freight manager, was boiling over. The Route 93 problem was now a significant line item in his quarterly review. His superiors were threatening to outsource the entire regional operation to a more efficient third-party carrier. Desperate to show he could cut costs, Peterson made a fatal error. He put the lucrative local transport contract for the Apex lithium mine out for a competitive bid. Titan had held the contract for a decade, growing complacent and lazy, overcharging for mediocre service. They assumed no serious competitor would emerge in the remote region. Maya saw the notice in a trade publication. It was a sign. This was stage 2. This was the moment her father had written about. She and Gus moved fast. They liquidated some investments and secured a final massive loan. It wasn't for more tools, it was for hardware. Within a week, J&R Logistics purchased its first 3 vehicles, meticulously maintained late-model Kenworth rigs. For the next 2 weeks, they didn't sleep. They prepared a bid that was more than a number. It was a new philosophy of logistics. Using the data she had secretly been collecting from drivers, Maya drafted a proposal that promised a 98% on-time delivery rate, real-time GPS tracking on every load, and an on-site J&R mechanic during loading and unloading to prevent delays. They were preparing not just to compete, but to make Titan freight obsolete. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of freight on Highway 93. The climax took place not on a dusty highway, but in the cold, sterile air of a corporate boardroom at the Apex Lithium headquarters. The room was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. On one side sat Maya, dressed in a simple, sharp business suit, with Gus beside her, his calm presence a silent anchor. On the other side sat Peterson from Titan Freight, flanked by two assistants who looked nervous. Peterson, however, was the picture of corporate arrogance. He gave Maya a cursory glance, dismissing her as a clerical assistant. Outside in the parking lot, Jed sat in the cab of his rig, waiting. He was the lead driver on the Apex route, and he was confident this was all a formality. He laughed to himself, thinking about the little garage trying to play in the big leagues. Peterson's presentation was first. It was slick, filled with corporate jargon and vague promises of synergistic partnerships. He leaned heavily on the Titan name, emphasizing their size and years of experience, as if that alone was enough. He finished with a smug smile, barely acknowledging Maya and Gus. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked to the head of the table and plugged her laptop into the projector. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed focused, like a mechanic diagnosing a complex problem. The head of the mining operation, a sharp executive named Ms. Alvarez, watched her with neutral curiosity. "Good morning," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Maya Johnson, and this is my partner, Gus Riley. We are J&R Logistics. We're not here to talk about our history. We're here to talk about your future." The first slide was a simple chart. "This is Titan Freight's on-time delivery performance for you over the last 2 years. You are paying for premium service, and you are receiving an 82% success rate." Peterson shifted in his seat, his smile vanishing. Maya clicked to the next slide, a map of Nevada covered in red dots. "These are the locations of every breakdown your Titan trucks have had on this route. And this," she clicked again, and numbers appeared next to each dot, "is the average downtime for each incident. 4 hours. 6 hours, 9 hours. Your lithium sits on the side of the road because your carrier's service model is inefficient." She then presented her plan. J&R's integrated system, the guaranteed 98% uptime, the real-time tracking, the on-site mechanic. It was a devastatingly effective presentation, all based on cold, hard data. Peterson, flustered, finally spoke up. "This is all very theoretical. We are Titan. We have 1,000 trucks. You have, what? 3? Ms. Alvarez looked at Maya. "Your plan is impressive, Ms. Johnson. But he has a point. It's aggressive. How can you be so certain?" This was the moment. Maya looked directly at Ms. Alvarez. "Because I know exactly what's happening on your route, right now." She clicked to her final slide. The screen showed a live GPS map. It was tracking every Titan truck in the state. 2 red icons were flashing. "As we speak, Titan Truck 481 is broken down 15 miles from your facility with a blown airline. It has been waiting for service for 3 hours. Truck 503 is 80 miles away, limping to an approved vendor with an engine issue. My facility is 10 miles from truck 481. I could have it back on the road before your current carrier even answers the phone." She paused, letting the information sink in. "You're right, Mr. Peterson. I don't have 1,000 trucks. I have a better system." The boardroom was utterly silent. Peterson's face was pale. He had been surgically dismantled with his own company's failures. Ms. Alvarez stared at the screen, then at Maya, a slow smile spreading across her face. She turned to Peterson. "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." It was the coldest, most final dismissal imaginable. As Peterson and his team shuffled out in disgrace, Ms. Alvarez extended a hand to Maya. "Ms. Johnson, I believe you and I have a contract to sign." Outside, Jed's radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice was flat. "Return to the yard, Jed. We've lost the Apex contract." Jed stared out his windshield and saw Maya and Gus walk out of the main entrance, shaking hands with the mine executive. The world tilted on its axis. The woman he had relentlessly mocked, the roadside joke, had just single-handedly defeated his entire company. The victory in the boardroom was the first tremor of an earthquake. J&R Logistics, quickly rebranded to Johnson and Riley Freight, executed the Apex Lithium contract with ruthless efficiency. Their 98% on-time promise turned out to be conservative. They hit 99.7% in their first year. Word of this new, hyper-efficient carrier spread like wildfire through the industry. The mining contract was followed by a contract for a food distributor, then a medical supply company. Within 2 years, J&R Freight had a fleet of 20 trucks, a state-of-the-art service center, and a reputation for being the most reliable carrier in the Southwest. Titan Freight couldn't compete. Their old model of brute force and brand recognition was no match for Maya's data-driven service integrated system. They bled contracts until eventually they closed their Nevada depot entirely, ceding the territory they once owned. Maya Johnson was no longer the girl on the side of the road. She was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. She commanded respect not because of her name or her gender, but because of her results. She walked through her bustling dispatch center, filled with the sound of ringing phones and tapping keyboards, with an air of quiet authority. She had not only fulfilled her father's legacy, she had built something far beyond his wildest dreams. Gus, now in his 70s, served as the chairman of the board, offering his wisdom from a comfortable office with a window that overlooked their fleet of gleaming trucks. He had honored his promise to his old friend and found a new family in the process. The conclusion of the story, the most satisfying part of her revenge, came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Her assistant informed her that a man named Jed Davis was here for a driver interview. Maya paused, then said, "Send him in." Jed entered her spacious office, his shoulders slumped, his old arrogance gone, replaced by a weary desperation. Titan's collapse had left him unemployed, and his reputation for being a difficult, slow driver preceded him. J&R was his last chance. He sat in the chair opposite her, unable to meet her gaze, staring at the floor. Maya reviewed his application in silence. She could have crushed him. She could have reminded him of his taunts, of the diesel fumes, of the satisfaction she felt in proving him wrong, but she didn't. She looked at the broken man in front of her and saw not an enemy, but a consequence. She finally looked up, her expression neutral. "At this company, Mr. Davis, you're judged by your performance and how you treat your colleagues. Nothing else. The work is hard, the standards are non-negotiable, and we have a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect. Can you meet those standards?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." She pushed a contract and a pen across the desk. "Probation is 90 days. Welcome to J&R Freight." Hiring him wasn't an act of forgiveness. It was the ultimate assertion of her power, the power to redefine the world he lived in, forcing him to abide by her rules of competence and respect. 5 years later, the name Johnson and Riley Freight was synonymous with innovation in logistics. Maya Johnson, now in her early 30s, was a celebrated figure in the business world. Her story featured in magazines and taught as a case study in business schools. Her company now operated a fleet of over 200 trucks across 3 states, but her work wasn't confined to boardrooms and balance sheets. She had established the Johnson and Riley Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to breaking down the very barriers she had faced. The foundation provided full scholarships for women and minorities to attend trade schools for diesel mechanics and offered seed grants for them to start their own small businesses in the transport sector. The final scene is not in her office, but in the gleaming, cavernous lobby of her corporate headquarters. Maya is giving a tour to the first class of scholarship recipients, a dozen young women with eager, hopeful faces, all dressed in fresh work uniforms. She leads them to the center of the lobby, to a single object displayed in a museum-quality glass case. It's a piece of wood, weathered and sun-bleached, with faded, hand-painted letters. It's the original sign from her father's shack, Johnson's Roadside Repair. One of the young women asked, "Why keep the old sign, Miss Johnson?" Maya looked from the sign to the faces of the next generation. "To remind us of 2 things," she said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "First, that every great empire begins with a single small patch of dirt, and second, to never ever underestimate the person on the side of the road. They might just be planning to own it." What an incredible journey of resilience and determination. The best revenge is truly massive success. Maya's story shows us that with grit and intelligence, you can overturn any obstacle and rewrite your own future. If you watched until the end, show some love and prove it by commenting, I watched until the end down below. Let us know what part of Maya's story inspired you the most. Was it her finding the business plan, her partnership with Gus, or that final epic moment in the boardroom? Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to you, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you loved this story of sweet revenge, you're not going to want to miss the video popping up on your screen right now. It's another tale of an underdog who gets the ultimate last laugh. Click on it, and we'll see you there.